One time, somewhere, I think it was on, like, it might have been social media, I'm not exactly sure, an interpretation of the Turing test. And it's, is the test for the machine or us? Is it testing whether the machine has consciousness or if we think it does?
Well,
And with the ramifications of that, what matters more? And this is where because you tried to separate the arguments of the specific, like, actual existence of free will and not, and then the belief of it.
yeah.
But honestly, if I have to be completely frank, I think the physical existence of it is less important
Whoa.
Yeah.
than the belief, because as much as we are, like, people of science, we're engineers.
Yeah.
We live our lives. Yes, we live in a world of physics, but you don't live your life thinking literally every single step about the different laws and why everything's happening.
Yeah,
Like,
totally.
obviously,
Yeah,
it comes to us
totally.
too much, a little bit too much. I think about moments randomly, but like, if I'm interacting with someone and they say something that's mean, it slights me. I'm not happy by that.
Yeah.
I don't spend my time thinking, did they make this logical choice? Or, like, was their body doing this due to just some form of chemical resistance, or they did something mean that wasn't nice?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to live through the belief of free will. That's, whether it's a choice that I've made or not due to actual free will, that is the choice that I've made.
No, I'd actually disagree with that. I think actually there's a different way to live. I
Okay.
think there's a way to live that says, okay, that person just slighted me. They just said something unkind. Well, maybe they had a bad day. Maybe they didn't sleep well. Maybe someone else just said something unkind to them. I think if you actually always go on the other side and always take the, well, what are the circumstances that could have made them do this? I think you can lead with empathy almost every time. If you go the anti-free will route on all those kinds of interactions, I actually think they'd ultimately make more peaceful, rather than being like, oh, I'm annoyed now, and now I'm going to hold a little bit of bad energy towards that person. I just think that's not actually effective.
And that's where I'd say you're putting words in my mouth, because I would actually carry the exact same argument. Is that I think it is free will. Is that they might not have had a great day. They might have stubbed their toe, which meant that they're a little bit well off, and so they don't go about the route that's as kind. They're not as focused on being a kind person, because it does, take effort to go out of your way to be nice, to be charitable and charismatic.
Make the choice.
Yeah, and it's like I think it's entirely possible to be empathetic and to believe that they made the choice to be less kind. Obviously, it's not always the most, like, obvious choice. Like, if I am not always the nicest person that I'd like to be, I don't wake up in the morning and go, oh, I'm going to be mean today.
Yeah.
It just tends to happen. Most people that are evil don't think they're evil. That's what makes them
Evil.
dangerous. Yeah.
And I would argue that makes my point even more. It's like evil people. Evil people are just being evil because that's where the circumstances led them.
Well,
So that's another thing where it's like, you can take something that looks pretty simple to me. We're just a summation of a bunch of events that have happened to us, and we're making decisions based on that. And then you can take this free will node and stick it in there, and you could say, okay, now we're just going to add this thing that it doesn't really logically make sense. We can't prove it doesn't exist, but we're just going to throw it in there because I have the feeling it does. It just doesn't make sense to me. With all these things, I think it's simpler. It makes more sense. I think it makes more logical sense. And I think it actually leads to a better world if we just say, okay, that's just another human going throughout their day. They had a bad day. They had a bad childhood, and so they grew up and they weren't as great, maybe. They did some bad things. I think if you look at every action is just a summation of other events that have happened, I think it leads to just like, wow, we don't need, like, I'm not better than that person because I came up with this idea and they didn't come up with this idea. Or like,
It gets
or
rid
like,
ego, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they're not worse than me because they did something bad and I didn't do something bad. They got unfortunate. They didn't get the same events that I had. They didn't. So I just think when you start looking at it from that realm, like that viewpoint, it's just a way to just be like, whoa, compassion to everyone. I don't know. I'm not trying to be like a hippie world peace. I don't know, but I just think it's a really nice way to get there. You're like, wow, everyone's just doing. Everyone's just reacting.
Your toe stubbing example and sort of expand upon it. I think that when you stub your toe, that is when the choice occurs for the rest of the day whether or not you're going to be a bad person. It's not an ongoing choice. It is right there. Will I let this thing affect the rest of my day? So like you think back when like you stub your toe or something, you're like, man, I'm not going to let this affect the rest of my day. I'm going to keep going. This didn't matter. That was that was a choice that you took right in the moment. You didn't let it affect you. So taking your example of like circumstances, I'm actually going to say something here that builds off of my whole thing earlier about like understanding. I don't think like fully formed, I don't think like young children have free will because of the nature that their brain isn't fully developed yet. And there is no set point in which free will occurs. This is now a personal thing. I'm not saying it does or doesn't. This is a personal thing. I don't think free will exists in like children because they aren't developed enough in order to make those choices about, I stubbed my toe, I'm not going to let this affect the rest of my day.
So if
they have a primitive form of free will in like the thing of like, oh, I'm going to play with this train or I'm going to play with these blocks. Like they have overarching, but they don't have a full-fledged, like full release of free will as adults do, which is part of the reason why we try people as adults and we try them as minors. We as
in the justice system,
we as a society have recognized that younger people don't have the same amount of free will as older people do.
Or their brains just aren't as developed, or they don't have the centers of their brain that make decisions.
Which is the same thing.
I don't think so. No,
Okay.
I think I just think you're making things more complicated than they need to be.
Really quickly, and I do
think you're
completely understand
oversimplificating.
where you like to simplify so much of it, but it's so, as I've been sitting here, I just keep drawing parallels between, because so many of the things that you've said are beliefs that I share, yet from a viewpoint of free will. Like it's based in, like my ideology is based in the belief that there is free will, and yet I share so many of the same sentiments of like, you know, somebody was raised a certain way, and so this has shaped, you know, personality, this has shaped how they will react. But that's kind of shaping the kind of that personality, and then this entity approaches the crossroads, and then they make the choice. Like I still think there is a certain degree of like how all these circumstances add together, but also where I think the free will portion of this becomes important is where you get the instances of people that act in spite of their circumstances. Because there are things where some people have had like the harshest upbringings. They have utterly the most tragic pasts imaginable. And then they are the kindest people. They're the most devoted to their communities. They've put in the most effort. They've achieved the greatest things in spite of such hardship.
The dude that we want to get on,
what?
the YouTuber.
Yeah. There's a person that we want to get on the podcast who was diagnosed with like terminal brain cancer, and he just started making videos about it, and he's like, just seems like a nice dude. He's totally like accepted the fact that he's going to die, you know, in like 15 months, and just he doesn't like to take charity, and he just like seems like a normal person. He like doesn't let that affect him. That's kind of what you're.
Yeah, I was making a callback.
Yeah.
I kind of want to try something. I want everyone to switch their standpoints and argue the opposite side. So
I don't think Liam can physically do that.
I'll try my best.
I want people
I'll steal Mad Free Mill.
I want you to try to argue. Like, I think where we're at, you two don't believe free will exists.
Yeah.
And I think us two do.
Yeah.
So I want us to switch
That's a great
revisit
idea.
some of the topics that we've talked about.
Yeah.
And then you two argue for free will and we'll argue against.
I wanted to like reconvene with the four of us.
Yeah, we can do that right
and I think I know where everyone stands. I'm gonna say what I think, and then if I'm wrong at all, correct me.
Yeah, we'll do.
So here's where I think we're at. Liam and I take the perspective where your brain is essentially a neural network. You know, based on your genetics and everything, and based on how you were born, it's a certain way, and all the things that happen, all the input that all your sensors get, your nose, your mouth, your eyes, all these things add input. These different processes happen. Your neural network gets tuned, and then when you're quote unquote making a decision based on the current inputs and the pre-existence of how your neurological, let's say, the neural net, whatever, is made up. Electrons fire and these things to quote unquote make a decision, and then that's right. That's kind of where that's kind of where we're at. And I think Brendan and Finian are at the standpoint of yes, but there's that causa sui. There's that like thing that either originates in your consciousness or originates somewhere else within you that is affecting that decision, that has say in that decision, whether it's your soul, whether it's a scientific consciousness, like wherever it comes from, there's something within you that's altering it. And I think Liam and I are like, that's just not there, right?
Yeah.
Is that how we're all?
Yeah.
What do you, Brendan's not?
Yes. No, I think you're right about my standpoint. I think it's just, I, as much as I am a proponent of free will, I don't want to create a complete, schism from the physical existence, because it is an integral, like it's obviously a part of us. Our brain is what's mandating this. And I think I just have made a choice, funny word in this circumstances, but I've just made the choice to equate these interactions in the brain to free will. There's a certain degree of flux even in the structure of the brain. Like I forget the specific cortex, but there's one that I've saw some stuff about where it's like the more you do stuff that you don't want to, it grows. And it's just there's such an ability to change, a fluidity in the brain, in the actions that we take. I like to equate that to free will. And this is where I am perfectly happy if I get proven wrong. If someone comes out with a paper and it describes all the processes in the brain and how this equates to our belief of choice, I will happily accept that.
Right.
Yeah.
Because as I said earlier, I personally care more about how I choose to view it than the actual fact.
And I actually agree with you on that. I actually agree. I like to live my life thinking that I have free will, because if I don't, I feel like my life is meaningless, because I feel like I don't actually have any control over what happens to me.
That was actually a question that I thought about asking Liam, is like, how do you find purpose in what you do?
I was going to ask the same thing.
If you find all of your circumstances as the source of what's happening and not you, if the control is not coming from some choice that you've made, where do you find empowerment in what you do?
Where do you find purpose?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think from the other side of that, I think if you live as though you have this feeling like you're whatever that could mean, you're responsible for your actions, even though they're not logical, and there's intuition, and that somehow gives free will. Even if you make such an illogical argument, I don't see how that makes my life any better. I don't know. Like, I think the other side of that is like, okay, if I'm just a product of circumstances, then I feel like that's just the most relaxed. I can just live in the moment. I can just be like, well, maybe there isn't a point. Maybe we're just here, and we make a lot of meaning out of it. Like, we make meaning out of this podcast. We make so much meaning that we can build phones and we can build great stuff. And I think that's cool.
But doesn't that fill you with dread? It's like, oh, I'm just here. Like, living my life as though I have free will brings me joy, because I can like sit in my room and be like, I'm gonna do this thing because I can. I am not doing it because something else is determining that I should do it, or that anything else is making me do it. I'm doing it because I want to. And that makes me happy. And I think from a standpoint of there's no free will, you'll live a gray life.
I think the opposite, right? You just said from the standpoint that there is free will, you'll live a great life.
No, gray.
Gray life.
Gray
Yeah,
life.
I think
Sorry.
just monotone.
Oh,
Sorry.
sure, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Monochrome, all that.
Yeah.
But if I, can jump back in, what I was going to say is something that slight tangent but related, something that I have struggled to come to terms with is the presence of ambition in people. And this is where, and I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with but I just feel like there's a certain degree of complacency in the acceptance of this is the way the world works. And yes, you refer to it as relaxed, but that's not a viewpoint that I'm comfortable with. And I've gone through life, I've interacted with different people, and I can't live my life with a lack of purpose. It fills me with dread. I have had coworkers who I worked with someone. She had been in the same job making minimum wage for 37 years.
Wow.
And that I had to talk with my parents about this because I was like, what is this? I physically couldn't fathom this settlement of the circumstances. And that's kind of where I go into the free will I want to go through life with this viewpoint that I'm pushing, that there is some fight in me. If there's that existence of free will, there's this ability to resist. I don't know if but that's something that I just kind of view as uniquely human. It's this ability to improve, to strive. It's the dopamine in the brain, the molecule of more.
Yeah.
The
molecule of more.
Yeah, it's the name of the book that I'm reading.
Okay.
But I think that it's I would say that I am ambitious. I have things that I want to do, and I'm unsettled, but I just find it complacent. And that's purely from a personal standpoint. That's no scientific answer.
Sure.
But I am not personally comfortable with things being out of my hands.
Well, I think control is a really big part of it. I think, for example,
that
if you were to build
majority of the
if you were
part.
trying to build autonomous beings or robots that could think and do stuff, if they got complex enough, I bet you'd want to give them the idea that they have free will, because it might make them more sane. They might keep running into kind of logical pits if you didn't give them that sense. If they thought, well, okay, nothing that I do matters and everything's preordained or everything's decided by a bunch of factors that are out of my hands, I think you're right that certain intelligent creatures you could make would not work as well if they had that sense. So they need to have free will built in. I still don't think that implies free will. I think free will is basically just I think humans have always struggled with this idea of what's our purpose? Why are we here? I mean, we create religions, I think actually some of the biggest conflicts ever and the biggest things that have always been problems for humans are kind of come back to this idea of why we're here. Is it my God? Is it your God? Is it God or is it not God? Or whatever it is. I think a lot of them do end up coming to God for some reason. But I think that's just because humans might work better as a society if we arbitrarily decide there's a purpose. But just like the existence of God or not, which I'm not claiming to know the answer to, I don't think that it makes the most logical sense to just say, well, my life will work the best and I'll feel like I have the most meaning if I decide if I have free will. If I live as though I have free will. I don't think that actually makes free will a thing, though.
I think
it's the same thing as God.
I would like to clear up a misunderstanding that I think we have. I think you are under the impression of my argument of we can't rule it out, therefore it is. Mm-hmm. I am not saying.
No, I'm not. No, that's not what I think you think. Yeah.
Okay.
You're saying we can't rule it out. That's all you're saying.
I'm saying we can't rule it out, therefore we have to act as though it is there. I'm not saying that it is there. I'm saying that we have to treat that person as if it is there.
He's saying in case it is, he's like, if you have to choose one or the other, it's more ethical to go with the idea that they have free will in case that they do.
Sure.
That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I'm not saying that because we don't know, it has to be there. I'm saying because we don't know, we should act as though it is there. It's about how you treat that person rather than whether or not it exists or not.
And I would argue the best way to treat people of all is to not act as though they have free will.
So you
And
shouldn't lock anyone
and
up.
that's going back to, I just think if you treat everyone as though they're just a product of circumstances, I think that's the most compassionate and empathetic way you could view people. Because there's literally nothing they could do that could make you unempathetic toward them, if you view it from that standpoint.
Then there's nothing they could do to like make you feel anything towards them.
You can feel emotions towards them as long as you're able to. I mean, as long as you're able to assign to that like, okay, those are feelings.
But so you're saying
Feelings can be useful, but they're still just feelings.
You're saying you go through your day-to-day life seeing everyone as essentially automatons.
I have a life philosophy that is based on that. So yeah, I think that's the. I don't see everyone that way, but if someone does something to piss me off, I might have an emotion. I'm like, that pissed me off. Okay, now what am I gonna do with that? I'm like, okay, that pissed me off.
Does that not make you make it?
And actually, I tend to think that when you have an emotion that pisses you off about something else, I think that emotion is uniquely yours. I don't think other people can piss you off.
So from your standpoint, like everyone is essentially like metaphorically a painted robot.
Painted robot, what does that mean?
So like they underneath like who they are, everyone is the same. They don't really have any choice in the matter. They're pre-programmed. But
He's not saying pre-programmed.
No, definitely not. I'm saying you could add randomness in there. I don't think randomness changes the conversation.
That they didn't choose, like stimuli, different inputs and stuff has led to this turn of events.
Right.
And I'd also just make the argument that adding more complexity or the possibility for acting as if there's more complexity than what logically makes sense, I don't think makes any sense.
I don't
think there's any reason to do that.
In the sense of their actions are decided before they do it. I mean pre-programmed in the sense of they have a set way of in and out. So stimuli in, stimuli out.
Got it. Like at any given point, the neural net is what's choosing.
Correct.
Or choosing what happens.
Depending on your standpoint.
That's really interesting. So Liam, when you like show up late or miss a frisbee practice, do you put zero blame on yourself then? Because if you live in this philosophy of I couldn't choose, it wasn't my fault. Is that how you live?
How do you treat accountability?
No, if the process of me saying that's not good, I should fix that. That process is just a physical process like anything else. That's just a logical response to doing something improper. And that process of making those, going through that helps me fix that. What in your mind
says it's improper? Like
deep paths that were made at some point. That's the thing. I think our consciousness or whatever it is, whatever we're aware of, I think is just the tip of the iceberg. So I think there's lots of things in my head I'm not aware of. I just think adding something you're calling free will to that stuff that I'm not aware of is just, it's like making things more complicated than they need to be. It's like, why add complexity there when there's no logical basis?
So
there's no
you're taking
need
the
for
standpoint
it. There's basically like, okay, let's say you have like a neural network that's able to make decisions. You're not able to track all of the decisions. You don't know why it makes some of the decisions, but you know that everything still came from a really simple neural network, or maybe it's more complicated, but it's like, it came from a neural network either way. Mm-hmm. What is the use of calling it free will if we don't understand it? Like, how does that actually help? Why would we do that?
An analogy. I'd say it's how we exist. That's the human element.
Yeah.
For me, I would say that if I had to be correct, I would say that yes, the choices that we made are a biological process.
Mm-hmm. Whoa.
No. If I have to put my foot down here, it's a biological process. That's how science works.
Yeah.
It's a biological process. But I think in the operation of our world, the biological process element is not what matters.
And I agree with that.
And we've circled back to that many times.
Yes.
The existence of it, but like, I think because you talk about how like,
Yeah.
because he talked about how do you, both of them, how you deal with accountability and all that. But it's like where you place blame, I think an internal locus of control,
Yeah.
which I think that is incredibly important to someone's existence. I think that for my mental health and all these things, I think that that's a vital thing to kind of understand, is that it's like, if something has happened that I am not happy with, it is most likely derived from a choice that I made. Like if I didn't get a grade that I was looking for on a test, it's because I didn't put in as much effort as I could to study.
Sure.
And I just think, but like that was a choice. But it's like I chose not to study for things that were easier. I chose to, sit around, do something rather pointless, objectively speaking.
And you'd agree that the response to that of your mind should be to update the neural processes that made you lead to a choice where you didn't study as much as you
But
should.
it doesn't. I don't study more. I don't study any more than I did sophomore year of high school.
Yeah, I don't really either.
But
I mean,
Liam is taking the standpoint of Occam's razor to the extreme. The simplest explanation
It is Occam's
Oh, yeah.
razor. That's-
is normally the correct one.
yeah.
So you're taking that to the absolute extreme, which is for us to make decisions, there cannot be any extra element in there.
And if I were to take what I think is you guys' argument to the extreme, I think you guys' argument leads to heaven and hell. And good people get to have eternal pleasure and bad people have eternal suffering.